Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we will be doing some rail fanning in and around the city of Cleveland, Ohio. The day's date is June 25th, 2025, and we start our morning in Bedford, Ohio, just after sunrise. Approaching us from the south is Wheeling Lake Erie Train 663, which runs northbound from Glen Willow, Ohio, to East 93rd Street in Cleveland, where it serves Ferrous Processing and Trading, or FPT. Leading today's train northbound would be Wheeling Lake Erie GP35 number 200. This locomotive was repainted in 2003 with a special paint scheme to commemorate Ohio's bicentennial celebration. Trailing in the second position would be Wheeling Lake Erie 102, also a GP35, adorning Operation Lifesaver logos on both sides of the long hood. Trailing in the third position would be a GP40-3 owned by the Akron, Barberton, and Cluster Railway, a subsidiary of the Wheeling Lake Erie, number 4005. The empty gondolas at the front of the train would be taken to Ferrous Processing and Trading, whereas the loaded gondolas towards the rear of the train would be for National Stone and Lime. Downtown Bedford makes for a very nice urban scene, as train 663 rolls northbound towards Cleveland only an hour after the sun had risen. If you look to the upper right side of your screen by the power lines, you will see the tracks for Norfolk Southern's Cleveland line, which we'll see a train on later in this video. I caught up to the train again at East 93rd Street in Cleveland, where they would tie down their train and wait for permission to start switching out the different industries located here. On the right side of your screen, where all the gondolas are, is where National Stone and Lime is, and directly behind me is Ferrous Processing and Trading, where the end of the line is. Wheeling Lake Erie isn't the only railroad to serve Ferrous Processing and Trading, and we would soon stumble upon the other railroad, the Cleveland Cuyahoga Railway. Formerly known as the Cleveland Commercial Railroad, the 2019 purchase by Omnitracks came with a few changes to the railroad. the most notable changes being the name change, as well as getting rid of the railroad's fleet of GP39 locomotives. Now, the only locomotive on the property is a GP38-3, number 2254. This locomotive wears the corporate paint scheme of Omnitrax, and was brought in after the takeover. Leased by Ferris is CTVX number 962, an ex-Cleveland Union Terminal / New York Central SW900. This unit was built in 1954 and has spent the majority of its life here in Cleveland, and continues to serve the area to this day. To begin their morning's operations, the crew would pick up 5 loads from Ferris and then run westbound to Von Willer Yard, where their cars get staged before being sent off to their respective customers. In order to get to Von Willer Yard, the crew would have to call Norfolk Southern's Cleveland East dispatcher in order to cross the diamond with the Cleveland line at control point 117.
17, will you take us? On eastbound, could be next. Roger, 1 eastbound, thank you.
What you just heard was a brief snippet of the CCR crew calling the Cleveland East dispatcher in order to get permission to cross the diamond. The dispatcher told them that they had 1 eastbound to wait on before they'd be able to cross, and before we knew it, that eastbound was on top of us. That would be train C89, a local train running from Rockport Yard to Twinsburg and back. With the signal to cross the diamond, the Cleveland Cuyahoga Railway continues westbound towards Von Willer Yard. They would have a few pickups to make at a small siding track next to East 65th Street. Venturing closer towards the city, I set up my cameras in an area overlooking the northern part of the industrial valley of Cleveland. Here we can see the massive bridge that carries the former nickel plate mainline, now Norfolk Southern Lake Erie District, over the Cuyahoga River. Approaching the bridge is westbound Hotshot Intermodal Train 29P, which runs from Buffalo, New York to Chicago, Illinois. Moving down into the steel yards, we find Norfolk Southern train C-22 preparing to depart Campbell Yard for its run up the hill to Rockport Yard. This is a daily turn job that originates out of Campbell Yard and usually uses EMD power, so when I arrived to find a GE C44-9W on point, I was pleasantly surprised. I presume they had this locomotive on the train today because it was a heavier and longer train than usual and needed all the extra power it could to get up the hill. I set up my cameras underneath the Denison-Harvard Bridge, where Norfolk Southern's belt line crosses over the CSX Cleveland subdivision, which runs from Parma to Clark Avenue Yard. If you've ever driven on I-71 through downtown, you probably have driven past the Cleveland Metropark's Brookside Reservation. CSX's Cleveland subdivision runs right between the park and the freeway, making for a very neat vantage point to shoot trains from. CSX L317 runs from Parma Yard to Clark Avenue Yard 7 days a week. We can see it here as it works its way eastbound between the freeway and the Metroparks. A solo GP40-2, number 6280, leads today's train. After switching cars around in the Clark Avenue Yard for a little while, CSX L317 can now cross over the Cuyahoga River to switch out Zalcon chemicals, as well as interchange cars with the Cleveland Works Railway. A big thanks to that truck who just blew a bunch of dust into my camera lens, but there's not a whole lot we can do about that. Now that they have crossed the river, L317 dropped a few coil cars for interchange with the Cleveland Works Railway, and can now back down the spur to serve Zalcon Chemicals. Zalcon is a manufacturer of specialty chemicals and are the largest producer and seller of galvanizing fluxes in the world. Driving down Independence Road a little bit further, I came across this Cleveland Works Railway bottle train. They must not have had enough traction to get up the hill and wound up stalling right in front of me on the crossing. They would wind up having to reverse back down the hill, and after their second attempt, would make it up the hill and into the plant. Starting to work my way back towards home, I decided to stop by CSX's Collinwood Yard to see if there was any action going on. I arrived to find 3 eastbound trains sitting at the Station E fueling racks.
Go ahead, I-01. Here we go, you sit down.
That westbound.
Anything interesting on it? Not at all.
My phone's dead, so I can't look at anything really.
Alright, 2 minutes waiting on a track anyway, but I'm gonna ask about the fuel.
Okay, right.
Got you.
I also stumbled across a low-ram rail grinder preparing to run eastbound overnight to Ashtabula. Thank you all so much for watching, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as well as maybe hit the notification bells to not miss any future uploads with more great railroad content just like this. This is Anthony with Northern Ohio Railfanning Productions, signing off.